There's a dead construction site on the Golden Horn, imperial marble, walls that climb to the first row of windows, and stop. They've been stopped for more than half a century. Rain sits in the foundations. Gulls nest where a dome was supposed to close over the water. 2 generations have walked past it, and the whole city agrees on what it means. Some woman in the palace started a mosque and failed. The city is wrong about almost every word in that sentence, because this is the story of the girls the Ottoman Empire turned into mothers before it would even have called them adults, and how those girls ended up running the empire. One of them, her name is Turhan, bought at about 12, is going to finish that ruin. What it costs her? That's the video. Istanbul, September 2nd, 1651. Past midnight. Inside the imperial palace, in rooms grown men are forbidden to enter, torches are moving. By dawn, Turhan will be the most powerful person in the Ottoman state, regent of an empire at about 24. 11 years ago, she was cargo on a slave route out of the Eastern European steppe. Tonight, the woman who once owned her is hiding somewhere in these rooms, and Turhan's men are going door to door. 2 things have to be true for this night to make any sense, and this video proves both. That the most powerful job in the Ottoman Empire, an empire running from Hungary to Yemen, was not vizier, not general, not even sultan, it was mother, and that for 100 years the empire deliberately kept handing that job to children. We'll follow the machine that did it, the 2 girls it turned into rivals, and the moment one of them shut the whole thing down. Everything here comes from the palace's own pay registers, from ambassadors' coded dispatches, and from the court's own chronicle. And where the record gets thin, I'll tell you, out loud. So how does an empire end up governed from a nursery? Not by accident, by design. And at the time, everyone thought the design was brilliant. Here's the logic. From the 15th century on, Ottoman sultans basically stopped marrying. What does a royal wife actually come with? A royal family. Foreign in-laws, treaties, ambitious uncles, rival claims to your throne. An enslaved concubine comes with none of that. No alliances, no clan. One loyalty, pointing in exactly one direction. Her child. So the dynasty made a decision. It would reproduce through enslaved women. On purpose, as policy. The historian Leslie Pierce rebuilt this institution from the palace's own account books, and what she found has nothing to do with the paintings. The imperial harem was organised like a garrison. Ranks, daily wages in silver, logged woman by woman, training, inspection, promotion. And at the very top, one office with real constitutional weight. Valide Sultan, mother of the reigning sultan. Because in this system, motherhood wasn't a family fact, it was a job. Under the old rules, 1 concubine, 1 son. And when that boy got sent out as a teenager to govern a province, she went with him, ran his household, guarded his interests, stood behind his chair. Her career, her status, her life expectancy, all of it rose and fell with his. So underneath every story about power in this empire, there's a mother's office. And the empire liked the people in that office young. How young? The girls came in as children, captives from border raids and slave markets, converted, renamed, trained for years, embroidery, music, protocol, scripture, inside a bureaucracy that logged their wages down to the day. And the boys they were assigned to? Barely older. December 1603. Ahmed I takes the throne. He's 13. 11 months later, November 1604, his first son is born, the future Sultan Osman II. The dates only need to land once. The heir to one of the largest empires on earth had a 14-year-old father. And the mother? A concubine the registers call Mahfiruz. That's nearly all they call her. No letters, no portrait from life, not one recorded word. Not because nobody thought she mattered, because the system logged women the way it logged supplies, what it paid them, not what they said. The empire's future was the child of children. And that was not the scandal, that was the procedure. And that was the stable version of the system. The unstable version had coffins. The law code attributed to Mehmed the Conqueror puts the succession doctrine in one sentence: whichever of my sons inherits the Sultanate, it is fitting for him to put his brothers to death. Scholars still argue about when exactly that clause was written down. Nobody argues about January 1595. Mehmed III takes the throne and has his 19 brothers strangled. The Venetian ambassador Marco Venier reported the scene to his Senate, and the city could do the counting for itself. 19 coffins carried out of the palace after their fathers. Some of them child-sized. After that, the dynasty flinched. 1603, Ahmed I spares his younger brother, and fratricide gets replaced with something new. Princes now wait. Sealed inside guarded palace apartments, the Ottomans came to call the kafes, the cage. A modern army has a file for this: hostage doctrine. The dynasty holding its own bloodline hostage against civil war. And for the mothers, everything changes. Your son doesn't ride out to a province with you anymore. He sits behind a locked door, alive at the state's convenience. His odds, and yours, now depend entirely on palace politics. The nursery has become the front line of the succession, and the women attached to it are its officers, whether they signed up or not. Feeding this machine was an entire economy. Tatar raiding parties swept the Black Sea steppe for captives. Markets graded them and priced them. Governors and admirals presented chosen girls to the palace the way they presented horses or falcons, as career moves. And none of this was whispered. It was budgeted, wage registers, training rosters, gift protocols. The whole apparatus sits in the open bureaucratic record, as routine as fodder contracts. Quick word on those records because it matters. The Ottoman chronicles were written by men the court paid. The Venetian ambassadors, the bailey, traded in palace gossip. They couldn't always check. Neither one is neutral. But their dates, their names, their payments cross-check against the registers again and again. So this video leans on them where they agree and tells you plainly where they don't. Because inside that apparatus around 1605, the registers pick up a girl who is going to bend the entire century around herself. Tradition says she was Greek, a priest's daughter from the islands, born around 1590, named Anastasia. Maybe. It may be legend. The record only really starts once the palace renames her Kösem. By her mid-teens, she's a concubine of the young Ahmed I. By 1616, the Venetian bailor Cristoforo Valier is writing home, in a dispatch quoted by Pierce, that this woman can do whatever she wants with the Sultan, that she is denied nothing. Then Ahmed dies, 1617. Kösem is about 27, a widow with young sons, and the dynasty drops into the fastest churn in its history. Her stepson Osman II, the boy with the 14-year-old father, is deposed by his own soldiers in 1622 and killed. He's 17, the first Ottoman Sultan destroyed by his own subjects. 1 year later, Kösem's son Murad IV takes the throne. He is 11, and in September 1623, the thing this system was never designed to admit becomes official. A former slave girl governs the Ottoman Empire, openly, as regent for her child. Kösem holds the state together through Janissary revolts, empty treasuries, frontier wars. First for Murad, then after Murad dies in 1640, for her last surviving son, Ibrahim, a man who spent almost his whole life locked in the cafes and came out of it visibly unwell. Venetian dispatches from the 1640s describe the government, in plain terms, as hers. 4 decades inside these walls. Ambassadors rotate out, viziers get strangled, sultans die, Kösem stays. By now, to the palace, she isn't a person, she's the weather. She had survived 4 sultans, outlasted every rival the empire could produce. The thing she would not survive was a gift she approved herself. Around 1640, somewhere north of the Black Sea, a Tatar raiding party takes a girl of about 12 off the Ruthenian steppe, same supply line that's been feeding the palace for 2 centuries. She's sold, moved south, eventually presented to the palace as a gift, inspected, renamed Turhan, assigned as a concubine to the new sultan, Ibrahim, and the woman who signs off on her? Kösem, not a courtesy, procedure. Because here's the emergency underneath it. Ibrahim is the last male Ottoman alive, apart from his own future sons. The dynasty of Osman, after 3 centuries, is down to 1 damaged man, and the state's answer to that emergency is to requisition children. January 2nd, 1642, Turhan gives birth to a son, Mehmed. She's about 15. Criers carry it through the capital. The city celebrates. The realm is secure. In the registers, her wage goes up. The empire has just been rescued, that's the official reading, by a 15-year-old whose legal status is property. Those 2 facts side by side are the whole century. This state could survive anything except an empty nursery. 6 years later, the machine jams, and the question of who gets to repair it, the grandmother or the mother, is a question the palace will answer with a cord. Summer, 1648. Ibrahim's reign has curdled. Ruinous spending on furs and favourites, offices for sale, a war with Venice over Crete, and enemy squadrons choking the Dardanelles. The strait the capital eats through. The janissaries and the scholars of the law move together. August 8th, they depose him and enthrone his son, Mehmed IV, Turhan's boy. He is 6 years old. 10 days later, the clerics issue a ruling, and Ibrahim is strangled in the palace. The court's own chronicle, compiled by Mustafa Naima from the notes of men who were alive that year, reports that Kösem consented to her own son's removal. It even preserves a message it says she sent about him. In the end, he will leave neither you nor me alive. Were those her exact words? Nobody can prove it now. What's documented is what she did next. Custom says the new sultan's mother becomes valide. Turhan is 21, and the men running the state decide she's too young, too green, so they keep Kösem in office. Büyük valide, the elder mother. Nothing like it had ever been done. Here's what the empire now has at the top: a 6-year-old sultan and 2 living queen mothers, the grandmother who's governed for a quarter century, and the mother who was merchandise 9 years ago. A modern staff college has a name for what that creates: a command vacuum. 2 rival courts form around it within months. Kösem's wired into the janissary officers she's cultivated for decades, and Turhan's built on the palace eunuchs, on the bureaucrats, and on her own startling speed at learning the game. For 3 years, the 2 households fight a war without battles. Over appointments, over the treasury, over access to a child, and this is where the story refuses to hand you a villain. Why would a grandmother in her 60s move against a mother of 24? Because from her chair, the logic is coldly coherent. She has watched a 17-year-old sultan get lynched by his own army. She has watched one son drink himself into an early grave and the other come out of the cage broken. She has held this state upright through 2 child reigns, and she knows, better than anyone alive, what an inexperienced hand at the top costs in provinces and blood. In that ledger, a 24-year-old valide isn't an insult. She's a security risk. Every move Kösem makes in 1651, including the terrible one, follows from that arithmetic. And the terrible one is this: the chronicle and the dispatches agree on the outline. Kösem prepares to solve the Turhan problem by replacing the Sultan himself, deposing Mehmed IV, her own grandson, in favour of another grandson, the child Suleiman, whose mother Dilashub is judged quieter, more manageable, easier to rule through. Janissary commanders are brought in. There's talk of opening the palace gates to them. And no, this is not a rumour Naima invented. He names the officers who paid for that plan with their lives days later. By the last days of August 1651, the plan is moving, and one detail has been left out of every calculation in the palace: a name. And who that name belongs to decides the empire. On paper, this contest is already over. Kösem controls the senior Janissary officers. She controls precedent, wealth, 46 years of institutional memory. Ambassadors write about her the way they write about the weather. Turhan controls a bedroom wing and a 6-year-old. Any sober analyst in Istanbul that week bets on the grandmother. The paper was missing one line. The plan had been overheard inside Kösem's own household. A woman of her domestic staff, the chronicle records her as Meleki Hatun, carries the entire design to Turhan's side. To the chief harem eunuch, Süleyman Aga, the most guarded political secret in the empire, walks out of Kösem's apartments in the memory of a servant the registers barely bother to describe. Which brings us back to where we started, September 2nd, 1651. Past midnight, Naima, the empire's official chronicler, working from the notes of men who lived through that night, lets it be reconstructed almost door by door. Turan's eunuchs move first. Corridors men were never meant to enter. Torches, locked doors, forced one after another. Kösem's apartments, lamps out, rooms wrong, emptied, silent, staged. She isn't gone, she's hiding. The search tightens chamber by chamber until they find her, an old woman pressed into a clothes cupboard in the dark, the richest, most feared political figure of her century. She's dragged out. There's a struggle. The accounts differ on the details, and this video won't pretend to know them. It ends with a cord, and it ends fast. Nearly half a century inside these walls. Ruler, in fact, through 3 reigns. Dead before dawn, on the floor of the palace she ran, on the orders of the girl she once inspected and renamed like inventory. The morning after shows you what both women had actually built. Naima records Istanbul in real grief. Kösem had poured fortunes into charity, freed slaves, paid prisoners' debts. And the markets, he reports, stay shut for 3 days of mourning. The senior Janissary plotters are hunted down and executed within the week. Meleki Hatun is rewarded and rises in Turhan's service, and the empire wakes up to a regent of about 24, holding sole power over a state that veteran grand viziers had failed to steady. Treasury? Empty. And an enemy fleet loose in the Aegean. 5 years of drift follow. Grand viziers cycle through the office. Then 1656. The Venetians smash the Ottoman fleet within sight of the Dardanelles and take the islands of Tenedos and Lemnos. The capital, which eats by sea, starts to panic. Every crisis of this century has been answered the same way. The valide pulls more strings into her own hands. What Turhan does instead is the hinge of the entire era. September 1656. She summons Köprülü Mehmed Pasha, an unfashionable provincial governor, nearly 80 years old, and he names his price: absolute authority. His appointment's final, no palace interference, or he goes home. Every instinct of the system that raised her says, refuse. Turhan accepts, in writing, in council. The regent signs the substance of the regency away, and it works. The next summer, his fleet breaks the blockade at the Dardanelles. Tenedos is retaken that September, Lemnos in November. The currency and the chain of command come back, brutally, but they come back, and his family will run the empire for a generation. With that one appointment, the century historians call the Sultanate of Women, 100 years of mothers governing, is over. Not defeated, concluded, shut down from the inside by its youngest member, 3 years after the machine asked her to kill for it. Only in hindsight do the signs line up, and they were sitting there the whole time, in the ages. A system that makes motherhood the supreme office will be governed by mothers. An empire that hands that office to 15-year-olds will one day be governed by them. And a girl handed absolute power young enough to still see the machine from the outside, she's the one person capable of choosing to switch it off. Kösem arrived at 15 and mastered the machine. Turhan arrived at 12 and outgrew it. What she does with the rest of her life is on the map of Turkey today. 1658, she finances 2 fortresses, Sedilbahir and Kumkale, one on each lip of the Dardanelles, the exact water the Venetians had closed. The former captive of the slave routes pays for the empire's front door, and she pays for it as a military installation, not a garden. Those walls stayed in service so long that in 1915, the Gallipoli campaign, soldiers were still fighting over them. Men dying 2.5 centuries later, along masonry commissioned by a teenage widow regent. And then there's the ruin. 1660. A fire guts the district around the abandoned site on the Golden Horn. Turhan takes the dead project over. The mosque begun in 1597 by Safiye, an earlier valide, another woman who had entered the palace as an enslaved girl, and she finishes it. By 1663, the dome finally closes over the water. In 1665, the complex opens. The Yeni Cami, the new mosque, the last great imperial mosque of Istanbul's classical age, 68 years from first stone to opening prayer. For 57 of those years, the city read the ruin as a woman's failure. It was a relay, begun by one bought girl, finished by another. The fates settle fast after that. Mehmed IV, the 6-year-old of 1648, reigns 39 years, second longest reign in Ottoman history. Turhan dies in 1683, buried in her own mosque, in a tomb that will gather 5 sultans around her over the following century. Her son and his successors laid to rest around the woman the empire once priced at a market. The gulls left the scaffolding a long time ago. Tourists photograph that dome every single day, and almost none of them are told whose account it settles. For 100 years, everyone asked who really ruled the empire. The registers held the answer the whole time: whoever the Sultan called mother